This wedding was an assignment for my Religion 2 class in Catholic school.
This one's wife. There will never be the great exposure. So how do you make her disappear? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. There are many people that would prefer for this one's wife to disappear. This was as a consequence of comments that are below the line, comments on YouTube, content of email. Some people wish that she would just go away. There are others who are a little more forthright in their observations, for instance, stating that they would prefer that she would foxtrot Oscar. Others simply state, if only she would embrace the privacy that she supposedly craves. Well, as you ought to know by now, that's simply not going to happen because as a narcissist, she needs publicity, because publicity provides her with fuel, which is the lifeblood of the narcissist. The responses, the reactions, the adulation, the hatred, the dislike, the disapproval, the applause, all of those things feed her, and her narcissism has grown accustomed to her receiving it on a massive scale and isn't wanting to give that up. Thus, she will continue to ensure that she's in the public eye. If one analyses it, at the current stage, what we seem to have is a pattern of announce something which then doesn't actually happen. Award ceremony for a bought award, either both of them, him or her. Some kind of faux royal tour announced to an ever-decreasing list of countries that would accommodate them. An initiative, basically reworking something that has been suggested before. Now, were it not for the fact that this one's wife is deeply unpopular, she could go about those things with the minimum of fuss and inconvenience. She could undertake the philanthropic work and just get on with it. But of course she needs the reaction, she needs the publicity around it. She could extend that philanthropic work by going to visit countries such as Nigeria and Colombia. But again, she needs it to be announced. And the problem that exists, of course, is that her behaviour is regularly commented upon, regularly spoken about, and she just simply won't go away. Behind all of that, of course, there is an ever-increasing litany of misdemeanours, of transgressions that have been committed by her. Some are cast iron, others debatable, and some are simply made up. But the list is a long one. And amongst many people who take a keen interest in this one's wife, there is a palpable sense of requiring justice. They are of the view that the behaviour of this one's wife, with regard to the many things that she said and done, that there ought to be some administration of justice towards her as a consequence of the way that she has behaved. That she should get her comeuppance, that she should suffer some form of detriment. Now, it might be argued that she's already experiencing a form of detriment because her popularity has plummeted. She faces repeated shunning by the A-list, the fashion houses, the cosmetic giants. Nobody's wanting to do deals with her. She gets ridiculed each and everywhere she goes. And therefore, you might argue that, in effect, she's already getting the outcome. She's already reaping what she's sown. But what is also clear is that this ongoing battle of her making an appearance, her turning up at an award ceremony, her appearing in the news once again, puff pieces being generated, and then that being met with criticism and ridicule, isn't satisfying enough for certain sections of the public. What they want is for there to be the great exposure. A killing blow. Not in a literal sense, but metaphorically. Something which is so great that it would cause her to slink away and never be heard of again. An exposure of her behaviours that is so fundamental that it cannot be denied, that it cannot be deflected from, that the majority of people would go, goodness me, look at that. There is the evidence. It demonstrates precisely what an unpleasant individual she is. Goodness me, look at that. That just demonstrates the wholesale lies that she's been telling. I don't want anything to do with her again. And the effect of such an exposure would make her a pariah, so that no organisation would touch her, news agencies would no longer want to write about her, and essentially she would then have to sink into obscurity. It is plain that there is a substantial section of the public that want that to happen, that the silver bullet is fired, which leads to her exposure and a dramatic fall from grace. It isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen because in order that to occur, there would need to be a wholesale exposure by the media. And as I have explained to you before, the media benefits from her still trundling along. Oh, they can criticise her. Yes, they can ridicule her. But they don't want to metaphorically slay her. Because if they did, they would in essence be slaughtering the cash cow. For as long as she continues to do things which annoy people, for as long as she continues to make appearances that have people up in arms, for as long as she continues to spew the beige word salad which has people creating videos about her, writing about her, putting up several posts a day on X about her, this means that the mainstream media will lap it up. They recognise that this one's wife is tabloid gold. Publish something about her, people will read it. Broadcast a news item about it, people will listen. People will watch. And people will comment. And all of this translates into clicks and comments and likes and dislikes, i.e. engagement, which drives advertising revenue. These organisations don't care about the truth or otherwise of this one's wife's behaviour. All they care about is the creation of money through the advertising revenue that's generated by engagement. There are, of course, those in social media who similarly are just driven by the revenue that's generated by talking about this one's wife and a little more than gossip sites. There are others, however, who actually do care about the comeuppance of this one's wife, that they have been offended by her behaviour, and their sense of justice means they want to see her brought to rights in some way. They want to see some of the major lies they believe that she has told be exposed, and that she has that fall from grace. The fact it hasn't happened, despite so many on social media presenting evidence which they claim counters some of the narrative that she's put forward, demonstrates the fact that despite how well constructed these arguments are, how well researched they are, how well investigated they have not proven enough to tip into the mainstream. They remain largely well known about amongst a certain community, but amongst the public as a whole, they don't know about them. And this is the problem. For those that present credible evidence which demonstrates certain lies that this one's wife has told, they simply can't get to the wider audience, which is the world. Mainstream media could provide a platform, and indeed, one has witnessed the repeated frustrations that people state in relation to mainstream media as to, surely they must know about this. Why aren't they investigating it? Why aren't they talking about this particular issue? Is it because there's a super injunction in place? Are they frightened of getting sued? Well, those are considerations, quite possibly. But the fact is that if they were to expose her, and they have the platform to do so, the fact is that she could then slip into obscurity, which means nobody takes an interest in her, therefore there's no point writing any articles, therefore there won't be any engagement, therefore the advertising revenue would drop. And thus, at the end of the day, media isn't about the delivery of news. that just happens to be the product that they're selling. Media, like so many other industries, is all about the bottom line, money. And in order to make money, they need to keep people engaged. In order to keep people engaged, they need this pantomime villain, this one's wife, to carry on doing what she does, attracting controversy, generating dislike, behaving in a particular way which draws disapproval. And thus, they're not going to slay her with huge exposure. Yes, you're right. They probably do have the evidence, which if they wanted to, they could publish, that they could broadcast to demonstrate the lies that have been told, to expose her. They probably have thick files of information about her, but they choose not to use it because it would be self-defeating with regard to the purpose for which their media exists. Thus, for those of you that continue to expect that there's going to be one day some great exposure of her, it simply isn't going to happen. Those that have the information and are willing to share it to expose her don't have the platform large enough for the world to see. Furthermore, even where it reaches people, the integrity of those individuals is invariably called into question. The major news outlets, they do have the reach. However, the fact is they're not going to utilize that reach as a consequence of the fact that they don't want to slay the cash cow. Thus, if she's not going to disappear as a consequence of a major exposure, what will it take to make her go away? Well, this is where actually you are able to do something about it. What it would take is for people to stop reading about her, stop commenting about her, stop issuing observations on X about her repeatedly throughout the day, stop making videos about her, stop watching videos about her. If the general public and those who are particularly invested in this one's wife stopped reading, watching, listening and commenting about her, then those that create content in relation to her would move on to something else. Those in the mainstream media would realise these articles aren't getting read as much as they once did. The below-the-line comments have really dropped off. She's not that interesting a news item anymore. We'll find something else to report on because, of course, there's plenty of other things going on in the world. The op-eds will dry up. The specific articles about her won't occur. Now, of course, she will continue to try and push the PR puff pieces. But if she's not facing as many threats to control as she once did, she's going to be less likely to do that. And thus, essentially, what it's going to have to take is that section of the public that remain invested in her will no longer have to remain invested in her. They'll have to stop. And if they do that, then those providers on social media, and in particular mainstream media, will no longer talk about her, no longer publish about her, no longer write about her. That then means she's starved of the fuel that she requires. She will try and get publicity. Her PR people will still try and attract the attention of the media, but they'll do it less and less because at the end of the day, they're not there to do her a favour. They're there to generate money. And they'll move on to somebody else that the public are interested in. They will stop writing about her, and it is that which will cause her to disappear. But the fact is, so many people will be unwilling to do that because they want to comment about her. They have a sense of camaraderie with other people in the community to exchange views and ideas. That they enjoy the experience of commenting, receiving likes to their comments, liking other people's comments, exchanging ideas and views, reacting with shock at the latest misdemeanor of this one's wife. They enjoy speculating about where it'll end up, the investigations as to what she's been doing, the unravelling of her behaviour. And they're invested in wanting to watch the train crash to see where it ends up. And therefore, this is the issue. That There's not going to be a major exposure. And the one thing that will make her go away completely is people no longer having an interest in her, but that's not going to happen any time soon. There isn't going to be, if you like, a mass switch off of everybody going, do you know what? Let's just end this now. It's all become a little bit tedious and repetitive. I'm not going to bother anymore. And lots of people go, you know what? I'm not going to either. Let's put an end to it all. That's it. Switch off from her. Instead, because many people will eventually get fed up of waiting for the great exposure that never comes, and they will become bored by the presence of the unflushable turd, whereby, oh, look, there's another pap walk, and, oh, she's turned up another awards ceremony, and, right, yeah, she's gone on another faux royal tour. Yep, seen all of this before. Same comments, same observations. She's wearing some clothing that doesn't fit her. The children are nowhere to be seen. Same old, same old. People will eventually get bored, and they will, in dribs and drabs, start to switch off, no longer read. As I've explained to you, she's been circling the plug hole for some time. She is on that downward spiral towards obscurity, but it's not going to be an overnight thing. It's not going to be an overnight thing in terms of a sudden exposure, which basically has her fleeing, never to be seen again. It's not going to be a sudden switch off by everybody, because people aren't simply going to do that. They might say, well, you stop watching, but I want to watch a little bit longer. You can stop reading about it, but, I've been invested in this for years, so I want to see where it ends up. More likely it will be that ultimately people will grow bored of waiting for the exposure that will never come, bored by the repeated behaviours of this one's wife because nothing really new occurs. Ventures are announced that go nowhere, shows are announced which never appear, ill-fitting clothing is worn. It's the same cycle of activity from her, because remember, you're dealing with an uninspiring, charisma-free, talent-free individual. And therefore, even though the media may not get bored with her, they'll continue to pump it out so long as people will read it. But ultimately, it will be a slow slide into obscurity that occurs as a consequence of eventually people becoming fed up of waiting for something to happen, and it doesn't actually. And then they go and find something else to focus on instead. Do you agree with me? Do you think that this is what is going to happen to this one's wife? Or do you think that there will be a massive exposure of her, that somebody will demonstrate the truth of what she is, and the world will sit up and take notice and turn their backs on her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.